All right, everybody, welcome in Friday afternoon. I guess it's already Friday evening over in Minneapolis. That's where Alec Lewis is, who writes for The Athletic, covering the Minnesota Vikings. He's been doing it for 3 years, and I think he's the perfect guy to talk to. The 49ers are en route right now from the Bay Area to Minneapolis. I'll be headed there tomorrow, Alec. Looking forward to seeing you. And how's it been going so far this year?
Yeah, it was always bound to be an interesting year in Minnesota. There's no question about it. It was a very, I would say, like tumultuous summer. There was a lot that kind of went on. You go back to Kirk Cousins leaving, and then Justin Jefferson getting his extension done, and Christian Darrisaw's extension, and then obviously the tragic news of Kyrie Jackson. So it's just been a whirlwind of a time. I think there was a lot of uncertainty before the season of just what the Vikings kind of would be as a team. Defensively, they revamped a lot of their personnel. Offensively, Sam Darnold was just a kind of a massive question mark. So week one, the Giants are not the most formidable of tests, is what I would say, to put it very, very nicely. And so this is really like, I mean, I expect US Bank Stadium to be rocking, as a lot of people are going to be hoping that this team can kind of carry the momentum forward. But I'm looking forward to this one a lot. It's pumped to be on here with you, David. I'm glad that I'm excited for you with SF Standard. I really am. I'm not excited that we're losing you and Tim, who have done an incredible job for us. But no, it's cool. It was cool to see that news. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And we were just talking a little bit before we went on air. And we realized that we have a parallel in that we started covering the respective teams that we're covering in the first year of their current regimes. I started with the Niners for The Athletic back in 2017 when Shanahan and Lynch took over. And you started with the Vikings. You came over from the Royals, right? You were doing baseball before that in 2022 when Kevin O'Connell took over. And also that's when you got Kwesi, right? The GM that same year. So
yeah, same time.
It was a hand-in-hand deal.
Yeah, it was the same time. And it's fascinating because like I covered the Kansas City Royals for 3 years. I remember seeing you in the press box one day. I think you were on A's duty at some
2019,
point.
Yep.
2019. The Royals were probably losing that day. They lost a lot. And the GM at the time was this guy, Dayton Moore, who was a very old school guy. I love him, still really respect him, but his background, like I started to know that I might get this Vikings job, and so I'm researching the GM, and his name's Kwesi Fomensa, and I'm like, what's his background? And I come to find out he did analytics in Cleveland and in San Francisco, and I was like, I'm about to switch from the most old school baseball general manager ever to probably arguably the most new school GM maybe hired in NFL history, frankly. And so it was a cool thing, but I do remember seeing you at Kauffman Stadium in 2019. But yeah, this regime has been very interesting these last couple years in terms of their transition from moving off Kirk Cousins and that salary cap structure to now having a rookie quarterback and the structure that kind of allows them. It's been kind of fascinating to watch this team build.
Well, the 49ers really wanted Sam Darnold back. They were thrilled with him as their backup quarterback. John Lynch was talking about it today. He said that Sam was the first one in the building consistently, that he carried himself like a starter, even though he was the backup. He really rehabilitated his image, I think, in that year with the 49ers. But Minnesota was willing to pay him $10 million, and that was obviously over the 49ers budget. But it's obviously been an unusual situation with the Vikings in that they did draft J.J. McCarthy. They brought Sam Darnold in for not a cheap deal. That I always say $10 million is like bridge starter money, a guy that you probably would have planned to start at the start of the season, even if McCarthy were healthy. Was that the plan? Did you get that read even before McCarthy was ruled out?
Yeah, that was the sense. I mean, going back to the spring and that signing, when they paid him $10 million, I mean, it's funny going back to like the Senior Bowl in February. I remember hearing like, the Vikings might kind of be interested in Sam if they end up moving off of Kirk. So it was like something, he was a guy they identified in free agency. The Broncos, it sounded like, were very interested in potentially snagging him. But yeah, with Sam, it was obvious that they felt like from a talent perspective, he could bridge that gap. And then I got to be honest, like as training camp kind of continued when JJ McCarthy was healthy, JJ was impressive to the point where I was like, yeah, they want Sam Darnold to probably be the guy to start to allow JJ to sit and learn. But JJ, I mean, the way he looked started to make you wonder how long they could ultimately wait. And then obviously JJ McCarthy goes down with the meniscus injury. It kind of surfaced randomly and then, undergoes surgery to repair that's out for the season. So it becomes Sam Darnold's opportunity. And it's like, you watched him Sunday against the Giants. He looked very comfortable. He looked very similar to how, in some ways, how Brock looks in San Francisco with the rhythm and the timing and the footwork and kind of just going through reads from 1 to 2 to 3. Like it was very crisp. I thought the Vikings' plan Sunday was very good. It's going to have to be again against a much tougher test this weekend Sunday.
Well, you did some great work about a week ago. This came out, and I wanted to give it a shout out. This is Alec's article. Can Vikings quarterback Sam Darnold finally find recipe for NFL success after years of dysfunction? And I feel this ties in directly with his story with the 49ers last year. They picked him up after a stint with the Jets and then a stint with the Panthers. I do have to say that the 6 games he started for Carolina in 2022 at the end of the season actually weren't bad. That might have been the start of the turnaround, but obviously learning under Shanahan, learning under Brian Griese, in the same room as Brock Purdy really helped Sam Darnold last season. And now he's doing what he's doing with that great first game in Minnesota. And, this goes back, I think, Alec, to early in training camp. I was reading some of your tweets, and Justin Jefferson, all those guys were wowed by him, like from the very start. Is that something that you're able to cover in this piece?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that I'm glad you mentioned Carolina because I actually talked to Ben McAdoo for this story, and Ben, is actually in New England now as kind of like an advisor of sorts with their offensive staff. But Ben was the offensive coordinator in that back half stretch in 2022 with Sam in Carolina, and Ben said to me, he's like, that was some of the most fun I've ever had coaching in my career, being with Sam and watching Sam have the success that he did. And you mentioned it, for Sam to go to San Francisco, which is the optimal environment probably for quarterback development. And really, Sam was open this week. I think it was an optimal environment for him to just sit and not feel the weight of the world on him for the first time in a long time. It sounded like that was really productive. But yeah, early on, once Justin Jefferson signed the extension and got in the building and Sam found him down the field for it looked like a 60-yard bomb in one of the first days of training camp. You knew that from an arm talent perspective, there has never been a question with this guy. For me, and really talking to people internally, it's, can we keep him within the intent of the play to where he's not turning the football over and he just stays in rhythm? And obviously things are going to break down. This is the NFL. Pockets are going to get muddy. You're going to have to go create. He can do that, but when he does that, this Viking staff has really doubled down a lot on, like, when you go create, don't turn the football over. And it's helped to have Josh McCown here, who is probably in the mold of a Brian Griese, who had a successful NFL career, has a lot of experience to be able to pass down. And so it's been a cool situation. And now it culminates with this test this weekend.
Well, Sam ran the scout team for the 49ers last year as the backup. So there's obviously a lot of experience for the top 49ers defenders going against him. I think he earned a lot of respect in that role last year. Diamond Lenore was joking around the other day. He's like, Sam and I have a connection. He throws the ball to me, but he said it with a smile. He wasn't talking crap. This was like former bros, right? Former teammates talking, and their lockers weren't too far apart from each other over on that long wall of the 49ers locker room. So I definitely, and Darnold and Christian McCaffrey, really good friends as well. I think that goes back to the Pac-12 days between those two guys. So it's one of those things where the week one performances from Darnold and Purdy were good enough to have them 1-2 in the efficiency rankings. Sam is number 1, Purdy's number 2. I get it. It's a small sample size. I'm not using this to evaluate anything. I just think that sometimes this all seems too scripted by the NFL, right? You get Darnold and Purdy coming off great games and they face each other right away.
Well, and it's like, it's at home, US Bank, against the former team for Sam Darnold, the team that you beat last year in week 7. And what was, I mean, my perspective of being here for this entire regime, that was the most impressive win. I mean, that night, obviously the 49ers did not have Debo. They did not have Trent Williams. And the Vikings did not have Justin Jefferson, but the Vikings, that Monday Night Football game, to be able to prevent the 49ers pass rush from wrecking the game. And then that was really Jordan Addison's coming out party in his rookie season, and he obviously won't be active Sunday. Yeah. So it is, there are a lot of dynamics. Yeah, as always, where it's like, how does the NFL get this good? Like, it's always this good. It's unbelievable. Like, and I really, this game's going to be interesting. But if the Vikings can eliminate turnovers and they don't trail early, I think this is going to be. I expect it to be a good game.
That building is certainly conducive to that. If Minnesota is able to get a hot start, 49ers can be in a little bit of trouble. That very thing happened last season. It was a 22-17 final. What's stuck out to me is the 49ers just weren't able to defend the pass. Kirk Cousins was 35 of 45, so he completed nearly 80% of his passes. The 49ers probably still would have been all right if they hadn't been victimized by the Jordan Addison touchdown at the very end of the half, where they ran cover 0 and Addison kind of just ripped the ball away from Charvarius Ward. I mean, that was a crazy play. And there's few NFL buildings that I've heard louder than US Bank Stadium was on that touchdown. It was just so shocking. And I think it's probably my favorite viewing experience in the NFL. The players will say, I wish it was natural grass, and I get it, but I'm not playing. I'm just watching from that open air press box. And that place, I mean, it's monolithic. I mean, it's a cathedral to football, right? You're sitting there and you feel like, I'm guessing even if the Vikings are out of it, playing a bad team, it still feels like a big game just because of the stadium.
No doubt. Yeah, it is an awesome environment. And I've always said, like, a lot of these domes that we go to and we watch games in, they sometimes feel like warehouses, or like it's dim. They feel like just like stone structures, and it's not like a great place to just enjoy. For some reason, US Bank, and I don't know if it is like the natural light that seeps in on one side through the windows. I don't know if it's just the way they built it, like the angles of it, but it's always, every game just feels awesome. It's the environment is great. So yeah, it should be, it was very fun on that Monday night game, very loud, obviously maybe not fun for 49ers fans who watched the result of it. But I expect, I'm curious though, as you mentioned the pass game last year, and I think the Vikings had a lot of success that night on third down. So that was an interesting aspect, just going through the numbers. But I'm curious, how do you think the 49ers will defend the pass this year? Maybe defend Justin Jefferson. Like, do you expect them to double him, or will they just man him up? I went back and watched the Jets game, and it looked like they kind of just manned up Garrett Wilson. So I just wonder, as someone who knows, maybe, I know it's a new defensive coordinator, but like who has followed them, like, do you feel like they think they can just stick Diamador Lenore or Charvarius Ward on them and shut them down? I can't imagine that would be the case.
Well, in the past, when they've gone up against really good receivers, and nobody's as good as Justin Jefferson, he's at the very top. But last year, for example, they ran a lot of zone. They've always run a lot of zone. That's kind of the Seattle style system. But Shanahan and Lynch swooped in last minute before they played Seattle, and DK Metcalf, and they overruled the defensive coordinator, who they later fired, Steve Wilkes. They overruled him, and they said, hey, we want Ward following Metcalf around, and he did the job. So they have broken from tendency. I tend to suspect that this will be a little bit of a mix. They're going to try to throw a bunch of different stuff at Justin Jefferson and Sam Darnold. What I do know is that obviously Wilkes is gone, so they've gone back in-house with the defensive coordinator position to Nick Sorensen. But they also brought in Brandon Staley, who obviously is not an in-house hire. He's not the DC, but he's a very advanced whiteboard guy for the 49ers. And he has promised to bring some wrinkles to this 49ers defense. That's the reason that they brought him in. They wanted a veteran coach to help them evolve defensively. And if there's ever a game to start showing some of these wrinkles, it's a week 2 matchup where you've got a quarterback who's familiar with you on the other side and the best receiver in the game, right? So I think that's part of the fun of September football, is you don't really know what coverages teams are going to run. You don't know how they've evolved with new coaching staffs. But I can tell you the history from last year was that we have seen some man coverage, some trailing coverage from Charvarius Ward. And obviously we've seen predominantly zone from the 49ers. So I would venture to say that we'll see a mix. They're not going to approach this with one size fits all for the whole game, unless something works early and it doesn't stop working. But I think that Jefferson's too good for one thing to work against them all game long.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Brandon Staley and you bringing him up is very interesting. I don't know if you know this, but he and Kevin O'Connell are very, very close. They were obviously together in Los Angeles, and so they spent that shared time together, but their families are very close.
Oh, nice.
They know each other very well. Kevin has like an immense respect for Brandon Staley and just his football mind. And obviously the Charger situation played out how it did. But it's interesting that you'd bring that up because I watched back the tape from last week and it looked like Charvarius Ward was mostly just locked on the left side.
And they weren't going after him. Did you see the spray chart? They were just avoiding Ward. Right. It looked like prime Richard Sherman.
And Kevin O'Connell said twice this week, actually, he's like, Charvarius Ward is like one of the best corners in the league. And Kevin, I mean, he's not one to shy away from showering praise, but his willingness to talk as highly as he did about Charvarius Ward, I thought was pretty telling. But I mean, regardless of what the 49ers do in the game and how they try to defend Justin Jefferson, without Jordan Addison, to me, one of the key aspects for Minnesota, at least, and it's probably just valuable to think about, is like, can these other guys, the Jalen Nailors, the Brandon Powells, the Trent Sherfields, can they separate whether or can they find pockets in zones? And it's a serious question that I don't like. The Vikings have to prove that they're going to have to prove it to have a chance in this game. But without Jordan Addison and then not having TJ Hawkinson, obviously, it is going to be the passing game is just affected at a level that last year, even without Justin, it's just going to be a different deal.
And I think the Jets, Alec, ran into a similar problem against the 49ers. They were so Garrett Wilson heavy. It worked for the first couple drives where they picked up some third downs in the secondary. But as soon as the 49ers made some minute adjustments, they started breaking up the passes that Aaron Rodgers was trying to force in there to Garrett Wilson. You're absolutely right. You need that second viable option. You probably need a third viable option because the 49ers defense is really good. I mean, there was a down year for that unit last year. And I would say that the nadir for the defense last year was probably the game after they played the Vikings where Joe Burrow carved them up. But that back-to-back, the Monday night against Minnesota and then against Cincinnati, so it was Cousins, the 35 of 45. I still remember walking out of the stadium with you, and we were talking about, wow, what we hadn't seen the 49ers defense just get carved like that. So obviously the 49ers have made big changes defensively, starting with leadership at the top. They have a stronger secondary this year. One could argue they have a stronger defensive line. It's certainly different. I'm wondering where you think Minnesota's run game is, how you think they're going to perform, because they've added a piece. They've added Aaron Jones, who the 49ers are really familiar with.
It's a great question. And you saw in week one, like, again, albeit the Giants, but Dexter Lawrence was like a one-man wrecking crew in that game. And I didn't think the blocking was perfect, but you saw why the Vikings added Aaron Jones. It was like that obvious, that clear from the get-go. He had two back-to-back explosive runs in the second half. And just all throughout the game, a lot of his production was just generated by his own vision. Believe he averaged the second highest yards after contact in week one. So just in terms of his ability to create beyond what was being blocked for him, he proved that in week one. I've always thought this guy is just like underrated nationally, and when he's healthy, he proves it every time. I was like pretty surprised that the Packers were moving off of him, to be honest. Just
and then he stayed in the division, right?
Right. And part of that, for me, just talking to him, there's a lot of motivation. Listening to him talk, it feels like he wants to be able to stick it to Green Bay, whether that happens in week 4 or whether that just happens with his production throughout the whole year. So this run game is definitely better. Schematically, I still have questions of like, what is your bread and butter? Are you still a mid zone type, tight zone, outside zone team, which is what Kevin O'Connell kind of implemented when they first arrived here? Or have they evolved to do more gap stuff the way I think they want to this year. It will be interesting as the season evolves to see what they lean on in that regard. And as I mentioned, lean on. I mean, a lot of it is just like with Trent Williams at left tackle. The Vikings have Christian Darrisaw, and they feel very strongly when they're running behind him or leaving him one-on-one in pass pro. They feel confident that he can kind of hold up.
Well, that's the headlining matchup, Darrisaw against Bosa, but Bosa will shift from side to side, so we might see some of him against Brian O'Neill. One area where I think the 49ers have definitely gotten stronger is the bookending edge with Leonard Floyd. He's just an impressive player when it comes to effort. Obviously, last year, effort was like the biggest issue for the 49ers with Chase Young, and the NFC Championship game. There was that play where he was loafing, and the 49ers had to address it before the Super Bowl. So I feel that they wanted to go out and get the total opposite type of player. They wanted to get somebody who never takes a step off, let alone a playoff. And Leonard Floyd was really good in week one. But we know the tackles are good for Minnesota. In Darrisaw, I don't think that O'Neill's a bad player either. Where the 49ers really overhauled their line, though, was the interior. Malik
I was going to ask.
Coming off a good game. Yeah, I mean, the Jordan Elliott, obviously, they have Javon Hargrave back for a second year. Where's Blake Brandel at? Where's Garrett Bradbury at? Where's Ed Ingram at? That's left guard to right guard for Minnesota. How do you think that matchup is going to play out?
Yeah, Blake Brandel, the left guard, had an exceptional first game against the Giants. The other two, it was not exceptional. Now, when you go against Dexter Lawrence, it's hard to – I mean, the guy – I think Blake Brandel called him like he's a grizzly bear on the field. Like, he's just absolutely ridiculous. But, I mean, the sore spot for me, if I'm naming my personal concerns for the Vikings for this game, it is, A, can they stop the 49ers run? Which they did last year, but even without Christian McCaffrey, that is a tall task, and I don't need to tell you that. So that's one concern. Second concern is what we've already talked about with the receivers beyond Justin Jefferson. Can those guys separate? And then probably my third primary concern is just Ed Ingram at right guard. Since 2022, no offensive lineman has allowed more pressures than Ed Ingram. 102 pressures since the start of 2022. It's a lot. I mean, and there were multiple. I think he allowed 6 pressures Sunday against the Giants.
6 in one game.
6 in one game, and his PFF pressure per snap was like 5 percentage points lower than anybody else from a guard perspective. So, I mean, he has a lot to prove in pass protection. I mean, always. But this 49ers front is going to make it really hard for them. And last year, the Vikings winning that game, to me, so much of that was about the offensive line's ability to just diffuse the 49ers pressure. And maybe the Vikings implemented no huddle to be able to affect.
They got
that.
it out. Kirk got it out quick last year.
He got it out quick. They were also leading in the game, which I think probably helped them being able to be deceptive in terms of run pass. But the interior of the offensive line is a major question mark going into this game. And one of the clear obvious ones, if you're thinking about just where, Minnesota and their ability to potentially win it or not.
Well, you talk about the parallels between these two teams, and obviously we can go to the fact that the Vikings GM used to be in the 49ers front office. Kevin O'Connell's in that McVay Shanahan tree, although they never coached
Kevin
together.
worked in Kevin was a special assistant for 16, Chip Kelly.
Right? Yeah.
I think it was
15.
I think it was
16. 16 is the Kelly.
It might have been 16. I heard a story that like Kevin was essentially like at that time, and for some reason on the practice field, you couldn't have a certain amount of guys. So Kevin was like driving remote control cars on the practice field to like signal 1 high, 2 high safe. Like that was his job at the time, less than a decade ago. Crazy. Anyway, I'll let you.
That was the year before I showed up, and then the year before Shanahan and Lynch showed up in 16 with Kelly. I did see that on O'Connell's resume. So, but then after that was when he got really involved with, and that's when the Shanahan tree really and the McVay tree took hold. Right in 17 is when Sean and Kyle both got their first head coaching jobs. But you have all these parallels. And then I think another parallel was, and I used the past tense, right guard. The 49ers had major problems at right guard last year. One could even argue that was the position that derailed them most in the Super Bowl. But that's one position that it looks like they've fixed through the draft. They've got a rookie in Dominic Pooney. So I figure this is a good way to flip it around and look at the 49ers offense against the Vikings defense, because I know Harrison Phillips, Stanford guy, great guy, just re-signed with the Vikings. He's going to be rushing against the inside. I don't know how often he's going to be rushing left, how often he's going to be rushing right guard. And I'm sure they'll bring it over center at some point, because the 49ers may have a little bit of a weakness there. But it's another test for the 49ers rookie Dominic Pooney against Harrison Phillips.
Yeah, I mean, and look, Harrison Phillips, he signed a 2-year extension this past week, and you mentioned it, Stanford guy, but he was the Vikings Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee last year. Just an exceptional person, has a foundation, Harrison's playmakers that, like, I mean, it just means so much to him. But he has not gotten the credit over the last 2 years for what he's done from a run-stopping perspective. Like, he is almost a one-man run game diffuser. And I wrote about this earlier this week, David, for us at The Athletic. But, you know, this matchup of Kyle Shanahan's offense and Brian Flores' defense, to me, is one of the most interesting probably of this weekend. But and I'm a nerd about the Vikings, obviously, but I think of, like, the season in general. These are two coordinators who value positional versatility as much as seemingly anybody. And they both thrive off deception. Like, Brian Flores will line up 8 guys on the line of scrimmage. You don't know if he's dropping 8, if he's rushing 8. It is the ultimate kind of like illusion mentality. But you know, to mention Pooney and Harrison Phillips, like, what was interesting in going back through last year's game is how effective the Vikings were at stopping the 49ers run game. I believe the 49ers did not have an explosive run in that entire game last year. And from what I looked, it was like one of their least efficient. I think it was the lowest yards per rush that they had all of last season was in that game against the Vikings. So, I mean, we'll see if Minnesota can duplicate that success. I don't know how much that was personnel driven. The 49ers obviously didn't have a Debo in that game, or Trent Williams. That definitely factored into probably them not running the ball as effectively. But that is Brian Flores' defense against Kyle Shanahan's offense. To me, it's part of the reason why I'm going to have trouble sleeping Saturday night, because I'm going to be so excited for it.
Yeah, so looking that up from last year, was 22 carries, 65 yards for the 49ers. I think obviously part of it is they got behind. They were fighting to stay in the game, and they made a comeback toward the end, but then Brock Purdy suffered what turned out to be a concussion on the quarterback sneak, and he threw his 2 interceptions after that, but they were essentially pass only at that point. 22 carries for 65 yards. That's 3 yards a carry. You'd be right. That was the worst rushing performance for the 49ers last year. And you'd also be correct about Brian Flores. He blitzes more than any defensive coordinator in the league. And another thing, too, he disguises a ton. So even when he's not blitzing, he'll show that he's bringing a bunch of guys, and he could just be rushing 3 and dropping 8 into coverage. And I think he got Brock Purdy late in that game on one of those drops with Cameron Bynum to seal the game. I think that the 49ers thought there was going to be much more pressure than it actually was. There wasn't, and Purdy had a bunch of time, but he threw an interception to the safety out of Cal. I think both picks actually went to Cam Bynum in that game. So I always view Brian Flores as a boom or bust defensive coordinator. We got to see one of the booms for the 49ers on the Christian McCaffrey screen pass. Remember the cover 0 play? I was crazy because it was a short pass, and all of a sudden McCaffrey was completely alone running 50 yards into the end zone. It was because the blitz was so aggressive that if one guy misses a tackle, you're toast. But, you live by a sword, you die by the sword if you're Brian Flores. And I think that with some of his aggression last year, it did end up paying off. That being said, the 49ers are a year healthier now, even without McCaffrey, and Purdy's a year wiser too. So I agree with you. I think that chess match is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and the Flores thing, it's so, like, last week leading up to the week 1 game against the Giants, all of the narrative was like, oh, Daniel Jones is terrible against pressure. Brian Flores is just going to let it eat. And then you see the first possession, and they've got 8 guys on the line of scrimmage. You're like, here we go. And then they rushed 4 in that game in week 1, more than they rushed 4 all of last year. And so, like, he wasn't even blitzing. So his willingness to break tendency, again, it's partly why it feels so similar almost to Kyle Shanahan. But you're right in that, like, and Brian Flores did not make any bones about it earlier this week. He's like, I mean, when you've got Kittle, Ayuk, Debo, like this and the offensive line that they have, specifically if Pooney performs the way he does at right guard, like it is an immense test, and they have not, like, they fully understand that. Now, I will say the Vikings personnel defensively is way different than it was last year.
Yeah,
they
no Danielle Hunter.
Yeah, no Danielle Hunter. The other edge rusher, DJ Wanham, is no longer on the team. Middle linebacker, it's not Jordan Hicks, it's Blake Cashman alongside Ivan Pace. The cornerbacks, they now have Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin, two veteran guys. So it's I mean, that's another aspect in terms of, like, I was thinking earlier this week, can they just duplicate what they did last year? Well, it's so hard to even think about that because of how different the personnel is. Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard, they drafted Dallas Turner, who's this like freaky athletic edge rusher. So it will make for a very I have no idea what to expect, really.
Both Hunter and DJ Wanham had nice games against the 49ers last year because there was no Trent Williams. So it was Jalen Moore and Colton McKivitz. So they definitely feasted on that. I think that even this new crop of edge rushers might really try, well, both sides. Trent Williams didn't practice all camp, and he had to go in for an IV. He said his tongue was cramping last week. Thankfully for the 49ers, victory was already in hand at that point. But I think if this game stays close down the stretch, you test Trent Williams if you're the Vikings, and you're always going to test the guy opposite Trent Williams. And he run blocked really well last game, and he had one pass blocking miss early on, Colton McKivitz, but then he was much better later. You know, Alec, what the 49ers did really well against the Jets, if you watch the first couple possessions of that game, New York's defense had the upper hand, and it's because they made that a pass rush and coverage game. The Jets did. The 49ers were able to relocate the fulcrum of the battle to, okay, we're not going to let you rush us. You're going to have to run defend us. And they just started running straight at them. I call it the diesel package with Jordan Mason. And I think that the 49ers are obviously going to try that until Minnesota proves they can stop it. Last year, the Vikings did stop it. They averaged only 3 yards a carry, but it is a different defense this year personnel-wise. So different year, different game, different dynamics, but I think it will come down to, can Minnesota at least slightly slow down the 49ers run game? Otherwise, San Francisco's playing this game downhill, and that's going to be trouble for the Vikings.
Yeah. And I remember last year, you'll remember this, Christian McCaffrey fumbled in the red zone.
Possession.
Yeah.
Like the Super Bowl. It was he did that twice. I think he's only done it twice in his entire career.
And I remember thinking, like, the Vikings had such turnover issues early in the season. To see it happen for somebody last year, to see it happen for somebody else is like, whoa, yeah, it's crazy. But no, to me, you hit the nail on the head. Like, if they can't stop the run, it's going to be a long, long night. If they can stop the run, then it's going to be a matter of, can the other guys offensively separate? And then like Sam Darnold taking care of the football. And then, like, is Brock Purdy able to carve them up? Because I will say, I asked Kevin O'Connell today about Brock, and he's like, you know, like Brock's field vision, which is something Kevin talks a lot about in terms of just his ability to see the field, to progress in rhythm. Like, you could tell there's a reverence with Kevin about Brock in that regard. So there's a respect factor for what Brock can do offensively. And yeah, it's going to be, I'm looking forward to it, as you could probably tell.
This is a big game for Brock. This is the closest that he gets to play to Iowa, and same for George Kittle. So Kittle's going to have like 20 family members coming from probably Iowa City or near where he went to college. Brock Purdy went to Iowa State, which is in Ames. And I have a story for you. When I wrote my Brock Purdy article this offseason, it was during OTAs when I flew into Ames, and I had to get to OTA practice the next day. So I was going to fly out of Des Moines at like 6 a.m. through Denver to make it back for OTAs. But there was thunderstorms in the area. And of course, the 6 a.m. flight was delayed because of like the crew clocking out or whatever. I'm like, damn, I'm not going to make it back to OTAs unless I do something drastic here. The drastic action was to book the direct flight out of Minneapolis at 7 a.m. but I did that at about 1 a.m. So I had to get on the road at 2 a.m. from Ames and drive the 3.5 hours, whatever it is, up to Minneapolis. Made it in time for the flight. I did make it to the 49ers OTA.
That's impressive.
Yeah,
That's a commitment. I mean, that's how you know the listeners. That's how you know your guy cares. I mean, come on.
I did not want to miss that OTA practice. It meant a lot to me because I was telling the guys at Iowa State, who are awesome, by the way. It
was a great
hey, I'm going to go see Brock at practice tomorrow. So I'll say what's up to him. And so I had to keep my word, right? If I don't make it to practice, then I wouldn't be a man of my word. But anyway, that's the drive that a lot of these Iowa State people are going to make. And it's not a tough one. It's tough when you do it at 2 a.m. Yeah, that was rough,
I wouldn't recommend that. Yeah, they'll probably leave a little later.
But you can wake up at 6 and hit the road at 7 and get to Minneapolis at 10 and tailgate for a couple hours and be good. So I think we'll see a lot of people doing that coming up. It's the closest the 49ers play to the state of Iowa. So it's a big Brock Purdy, George Kittle kind of game. And they'll obviously both be active for the 49ers.
It's a shame Hawkinson's. We would have the Iowa tight ends going back and forth. But no, no, that's an impressive. The fact that you would you'd be willing to. I've got stories, but I'm not. I mean, that is some serious commitment right there. No,
I was regretting it about halfway through. I'm like, oh, I'm tired. Once you have to start going to coffee at 3:30 a.m., you start questioning your life decisions. You're like, this is doing damage to my body that I probably shouldn't be doing just to make an OTA practice. But I made it. It's the article is out, and that was good. So here, kind of to wrap up. I titled this, "Will the 49ers beat the Vikings?" I do a video like this every week. We can pose the question to you, but we can pose it since you write about the Vikings. Will the Vikings beat the 49ers? And people will be able to put 2 and 2 together. I want you to answer it first, though. Who do you think wins this football game?
Yeah, the 49ers. I mean, do I think the Vikings have a chance to win the game? Yeah, I do. I really do. If they don't turn the football over and then if they can stop the run, to me, it'll be a close game. And I kind of expect it to be a close game. These two staffs, I think, are really good. I think the Viking staff on both sides will put together a good plan. And then ultimately, I mean, look, when you not having Jordan Addison is going to make it very tough. The interior of the Vikings offensive line, I have question marks about. The secondary receivers behind Justin Jefferson, I have questions about. Defensively, I think they're going to be good, and they're kind of dangerous, and like there might be volatility. But I think it's pretty good. So we'll see. But I'd say 49ers. We did a preview today. I think I predicted it like 21-17. So within a touchdown to me feels fair. So I mean, we shall see.
That's a low-scoring game, 21-17.
Yeah, low scoring. I mean, part of me feels like, if they stop the run defensively and then you force Brock Purdy into passing situations, then maybe he carves them up. But I think offensively, without having Jordan Addison, it's hard for me to think they're just going to put up 35 points and if they want to win the game. So that's what I'd say. I'm the worst predictor in the United States of America. So. You can come calling when.
Well, it's been a little tougher to predict the Vikings, who have been closer to a 500 team. Every week is more of a toss-up. I don't think I'm a good predictor either, but it hasn't been hard for the 49ers, especially over the last 2 seasons when they've won, 13 and 12 games, respectively. So they're favored in every single one of their games. I don't put out my score until Saturday because I'm actually still thinking of it. I'm going to run some numbers, but I will answer the question. I do think the 49ers will beat the Vikings and win this game. It was a hell of a game last year, though, and I'll say this. Short week for the 49ers, playing Monday night, going to Sunday, and they have to fly, which they are right now. The combination of those two things, plus the building in Minnesota, the 49ers haven't won there since 92 in Minneapolis.
Crazy.
Yeah. We can go through some of the history, too. They lost in 94. They had their Super Bowl team, but they didn't play Young and all those guys because it was week 17. So they were resting. They had the 1 seed. They got completely wrecked by Culpepper and Moss, I think, would it be 03? Does that sound right?
Sounds right.
Then Brett Favre in 09 threw a last-second touchdown to Greg Jennings, which was even crazier than the Jordan Addison play that we saw in 23. And then in 2018, and I'm probably leaving a game out, but in 2018 season opener, Kirk Cousins' debut for the Vikings, they just worked the 49ers in that game. They couldn't stop Cousins. I mean, he carved them up similarly to, I guess, what happened last year.
Yeah.
So now it's Sam Darnold. So maybe the 49ers are fighting some kind of hex in Minnesota, but
well, I mean, if the Vikings win this game, then they will be 2-0 and they play the Texans next week at home. But
that's
if they win
huge.
this,
wow.
Yeah, if they win this game and Sam Darnold looks solid, I mean, I would imagine they're going to kind of be the talk of the NFL just because it will kind of be out of nowhere, and the division is in such an interesting spot with Jordan Love obviously being injured. Caleb Williams obviously didn't look spectacular in week 1. So, yeah, that place is going to be rocking on Sunday for it to be the first home game. Just with it kind of being a new era of sorts without Kirk, it is going to be electric in there. So, from a like vibes, noise perspective, we'll see how that affects things.
All right, Alec, let's get your work out there in front of all these 49ers fans. This obviously they can follow you on Twitter and social media, but obviously they need to read this article about Sam Darnold on The Athletic. But I understand that you've started a YouTube channel fairly recently. So just let people know how they can find you, what you're trying to do with that to make sure that they give you a subscribe.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I got really creative with the name of this podcast YouTube channel I wanted to do, and I called it the Alec Lewis Show. I was actually the first person to create to create a podcast, B, to create a YouTube channel, and then C, to use their name in doing it. No one had ever done that before in the United States of America, and I chose to do that. But no, seriously, it's on YouTube at the Alec Lewis Show. And then you can find me on Twitter at Alec_Lewis. But no, I've done a couple episodes a week, do some previews, some recaps, have some guests, talk some journalism sometimes. But no, it's been fun. It's fun I love the writing, you know that probably, but it's cool to be able to chat with the people who like you're like the viewers right now who care so much about this stuff. It's really like why we do this, I think, at its core. So been fun.
Yeah, we got a ton of comments and stuff like that. Sometimes I'll read the comments and answer questions. Today we just had so much to say that I'll leave it alone. But it's really cool to see the engagement, especially early in the season. Everybody's optimistic about their respective teams, and both Vikings and 49ers fans should be really optimistic about week 1 because of what happened there. Just if your quarterback looks good in the NFL, you can go a long way. That's just I don't care who you play. If he looks good, 2 thumbs up. Now we'll see if Darnold can look good against the 49ers. That means more than looking good against the Giants. And I think the 49ers are walking into this game cautious of that because they got to see Sam improve behind the scenes all of last season. So anyway, everybody give Alec a follow. Great guy, covers the Vikings, and he's got his own channel now. So he's the authority for anything Minnesota Vikings leading into Sunday. Thanks for joining me, man. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, love doing it, David. Looking forward to seeing you. Glad you're not having to drive at 1 a.m. to get here. Hopefully the flight is a little bit easier than that.
Knock on wood. Hear that? Yeah. You never know. I actually have to take a layover because I decided against the 6 a.m. direct flight. I'm addicted to the airline that I have status with, so that narrows my options. And yeah, knock on wood. All right, man. We'll see you in the press box.
Sounds good. Thanks, David. See ya.